Welcome back. Let us now look into another aspect of our lesson, which is now the differences between ordinary and preference shares. Now, ordinary shares, what do we mean by that? These are shares that only receive dividends when profit is made. Whereas preference shares, these are shares or some type of these preference shares would receive dividends regardless of whether profit is made or not. And then we also have the idea that ordinary shares, normally the higher the profit, the higher the dividend. Whereas with your preference share, the difference becomes the idea that they receive a fixed rate of returns, and this would be paid on these types of shares, which is your preference shares. But when it comes to ordinary shares, if a company makes, for instance, 1 million, they'll have to get a percentage, whereas with preference shares, they'll receive the agreed upon amount, which might be the 20% that, or the 20,000 of fixed returns or fixed dividends. So we will look now into the types of preference shares. These are the types of preference shares. The first one is your participating preference share. What do we mean by that? Shareholders here are guaranteed their minimum fixed dividends. That is one thing. So if the minimum is 20,000, this is to say they are guaranteed to say they will receive those. But another aspect about the participating now is that shareholders are entitled to share in any surplus company profit. They can receive more when it comes to participating preference shares. And then we also have non-participating preference share or ordinary preference shares. What do we mean by that now? These shareholders now receive an amount equal to the initial investment plus accrued and unpaid dividends upon liquidation. So if they've invested 20,000 when they were buying their shares, in a case of liquidation, they will receive the 20,000 plus the unpaid through the investment period of their investment with the company, plus now the unpaid. So if maybe they were unpaid 2 times, meaning 20,000 times 2, which would make what now 40, then they'll receive 40 plus the 20,000 that was invested, meaning the 40 was for the 2 unpaid dividends, and then that would mean they would receive 60,000. Then shareholders do not receive extra dividends in a case of surplus or profits now. Then cumulative preference share. Shareholders are compensated for past dividends. Hence we say cumulative. They increase in value even if you are not paid. So let's say we have 20, 20 and 20, 21 and 2022. So what happens is that if the dividends for 2020 were paid, let's say 20,000, and then for 2021 nothing was paid, meaning when the shareholders receive on 2022, they have to receive 40,000. Why 40,000? Because there's 20,000 that was not paid in 2021, and together with the 20,000 for 2022, which will make the total returns for the year to be 40,000. And how did it accumulate? It accumulated because of the 20,000 that was not received in 2021. So hence we say shareholders are compensated for past dividends that were not paid when profits were too low to declare dividends. As I made an example, 2020 you did receive your dividends, but 2021 now the investor did not receive. Hence now in 2022 the investor will receive 40 because you're going to say 20 for 2021, 20,000 for the 2021, and 20,000 for 2022 will amount to 40,000. Then non-cumulative preference shares. Shareholders are not compensated for the past dividends that were not paid when profits were too low. So the same scenario again, 2020, 2021, and 2022. So what is going to happen here is that you receive your 20,000. You receive your 20,000 for 2020. You don't receive for your 2022. But then what happens is in 2022 now you are going to receive only 20,000 because you are a non-cumulative preference shareholder. Then redeemable preference shares. Shares can be redeemed or bought back at an option of the issuing company, either at a fixed price on a specified date or over a certain period of time. So this has to do with the idea that the company will be selling the shares to you with an option to say, we will buy them back maybe after 3 years. Hence we say redeemable. Then, non-redeemable shares are only bought back when the company closes down for reasons other than bankruptcy. So that is non-redeemable. Then convertible preference shares, what are we talking about here? These are shares or preference shares that can be converted into a predetermined number of ordinary shares on a date specified when the preference shares were issued. So when you are buying these shares, they will tell you to say how many do you want to convert in future to ordinary shares. So you'd say maybe I want to convert 100 of my shares. So when you do that in that particular date, when it comes, you can convert them into ordinary shares. Why do you want to convert them? Because ordinary shares would have higher return. This would have higher return. Then looking into non-convertible, these are shares that cannot be converted into ordinary shares. Then let us look now into the meaning of dividends and capital gain. What do we mean by that? Meaning of dividends, this refers now to the return on investment in shares, which is paid regularly by a company to its shareholders. Remember, they don't get interest, they get dividends as shareholders. Dividends are decided and managed by the company's board of directors and approved by shareholders through their voting rights. Hence, they attend the annual general meeting. Part and parcel of attending the meeting is to decide on what is going to be the dividends for the year. Then, capital gain, the return on investment for investing in property or fixed assets or any investment. So, capital gain is tax payable when selling an asset that has increased in value since it was bought. So, we are talking about property here. You buy a house for 600,000 and when you sell it maybe for 800,000. So how much capital did you gain? You have gained 200, meaning the value has gained 200,000. Hence, we are calling it capital gain. Then we look now into differences between now simple and compound, then look into the calculation. Now, what is the difference between simple and compound interest? Compound interest. Interest is earned on the original amount invested as well as interest accrued. Whereas simple interest is earned on the original amount, not on the interest accrued. So this is to say, with simple, you have invested 20,000 and you get your interest of that 20,000. So the interest, let's say the interest for 10% of 20,000, the answer would then be 2,000. So this is to say the 2,000 will not be added into the original amount, which is your 20,000, because when it's added now, it becomes now a different formula. Now with compound, what happens is that the 20,000 multiplied by the 10%, the answer is your 2,000. So when you calculate for the year after, the new original amount or capital amount would become 22,000 because the 2,000 has to be added. Now, compound interest, the principal amount grows with addition of the interest. As I showed you, 20,000, 10% becomes 2,000, which will amount to 22,000, meaning the principal amount has grown by 2,000. But with simple interest, the principal amount remains the same over the entire period of investment. So for each and every year, the investment period or the capital amount invested or principal amount will remain 20,000, whereas this side, it will increase to 22 and more depending with the number of years. And then with compound, it yields higher return on investment, whereas simple yields less return on investment. Now, let us look into calculating simple interest. We have now a scenario. Ronnie wants to invest 30,000 in a fixed deposit for 2 years. He approached Saint Bank and they offered him 10% simple interest. The question is to us now, calculate the interest amount Ronnie will receive after 2 years of his investment with Saint Bank. What is the principal amount there? 30,000. What is the percentage? 10%. So then we have to figure out to say what is 10% of what now? Of your 30,000, which becomes now 3,000. The answer for year 1 would become now 3,000. That is for year 1. Year 2, do we change now the principal amount? Remember, the principal amount is 30,000. So it will not change. It means the principal amount should remain 30,000 because the formula's instruction is to say this is what now? Simple interest. This is simple interest. The interest amount is not added into the principal amount. So we still use the same principal amount and say 10%. Then 10 over 100, obviously, 10 over 100, so that we get now again 3,000. So the total interest, calculate, the instruction is to calculate the interest amount. So the interest amount would be 6,000. Then let us look into how you would then calculate now for Ronette. Ronette wants to invest 30,000 in a fixed deposit for 2 years. She approached Capri Bank and they offered 10% compound interest. Calculate the interest amount Ronette will receive after 2 years if she invests with Capri Bank. Now, we do the same thing. What is the principal amount? 30,000. What is the interest? We have 10%. So we will say now 30,000 multiplied by 10 over 100. The answer is 3,000. But compounded, meaning the interest has to be added so that it can earn another interest. So that is for year 1. But when we go now to year 2, there has to be a change. What is the change? We have to add now 30,000 and add the interest that was earned for year 1, which is 3,000, to have now a new what? A new principal amount, which becomes 33,000. So when we calculate for year 2, we have to say the principal amount has increased by 3,000 because of the interest earned in year 1. So we'll say 33,000 multiplied by 10 over 100. What is the answer there? It becomes 3,300. So what is the answer here? We have to calculate interest for year 1 and interest for year 2. Interest for year 1 was 3,000. Interest for year 2 was 3,300. So the answer here is supposed to be what? 6,300. So that becomes now your final answer. So another question can come and say now, answer what? Give us the best investment option or the best interest option. So you'd obviously choose compound interest because it yields a higher return. So with that being said, I would love to say thank you for watching and hoping we are contributing to your investment skill and financial literacy so that you become a better investor in future. So thank you and keep watching our lessons.